How's it going, my fellow aquarium scientists? Professor Fish Tanks here, and in this video we're going to be diving deep into the world of scientific nomenclature. So stay tuned. So this is going to be just a brief video on an introduction to scientific nomenclature, or better yet, what we know as scientific names. So in this video, what we're going to be covering is why do we use scientific names, the history behind them, as well as what the scientific names are made out of, what comprises of a scientific name. So you may have asked yourself, why bother with scientific names? Why do I need to learn them? Why do I need to use them when I'm trying to figure out the name of a particular organism? And the short answer really is consistency. Although common names can be very easy for us to remember, there can be some inconsistencies with identification if we're just solely focusing on the common name. An organism may be called one thing in one part of the world, while it could be called something else in a different part of the world. Sometimes a particular organism may have two common names. So this is why it's very important for us, especially for scientists. We rarely refer to an organism with its common name. It's mostly always its scientific name. That is if we know what the scientific name is. And in terms of figuring out what the scientific name is, or even coming up with a scientific name for a newly discovered organism, is a whole different topic that I don't really think I'm going to be focusing on in this video. So what is the history of scientific nomenclature? Who invented this form of naming organisms? And that is credited to a Swedish biologist by the name of Carlos Linnaeus. He was born in May 23rd, 1707, and he was the one who introduced scientific nomenclature in the 1750s through his work called System of Nature. Now, one thing I want to note about this is, while doing my research on the history of scientific nomenclature, I came across two works of Carlos that were titled different. Now, it could be the same work, just titled differently, but I came across two works that may have introduced the concept of scientific nomenclature by Carlos. So if you guys know the correct answer, if I got this wrong and you guys know the correct answer, please mention it down in the comments below. But basically, he's the one that introduced the concept of scientific names in this work, and he's also the one who actually named us humans as Homo sapiens. So if you guys aren't aware, in the biological world, humans are mammals. We're part of the animal kingdom, and our scientific name is Homo sapien, and Carlos Linnaeus was the one who named us that. So the next question is, what makes up a scientific name? Now, to understand this portion of our video, we first have to understand the language of scientific names, because obviously when you say a scientific name, for the most part, it's not English. So what's the language that it is? And the answer to that is basically Latin or Greek. Back in those times, in the time of Carlos, Latin was the language of science. Mostly the educated people were able to read and write Latin. And it was also the language of the church, especially in the Catholic Church. And so, if you were studying to be a scientist, you had to be able to read and understand Latin, because a lot of the earlier works, especially in the European world, a lot of the scientific works were written in Latin or in Greek. If you studied, science, math, technology in the Islamic world, it would have been in Arabic. So that's why, especially in the European world, it's Latin and Greek that is been adopted as the language of scientific names. So the scientific name is comprised of two things. The first is the genus name, and the second is the species name. Now we're going to get a little bit more in depth in terms of the taxonomical tree of life is what it's usually referred to, and later on in the video. But for this section right now, it's basically genus, species. So the genus describes a larger group of animals as part of a taxonomical tree with similar characteristics. That can be the body shape, that could be any pattern on the body, coloration, things like that. And then the second portion is the species, which refers to the individual organism within that genus. So that species is what distinguishes an organism from a different organism. And the way to determine if a species is a different species from one another, you're looking at those characteristics even more specifically. It could be, in the case of the aquatic world, if we're looking at a fish, it could be the shape of a fin could be different. The fish would still be part of that same genus, but it could look a little bit different, just a tiny difference in that fish or in that organism will be enough for it to be distinguished as a different species. We've come across many times throughout the scientific world, almost every year a particular species may be renamed because they've discovered something different that wasn't discovered at the time of the naming of that particular species. Sometimes genuses, like a genus group in general, will be moved to a different genus, and that would just throw off the scientific names altogether, and us scientists would then have to be informed of that and relearn these scientific names and the characteristics in terms of why the scientific name was changed. So for example, we have here Pterophyllum scalare. So the Pterophyllum is the genus, the Scalare is the species name. Now, I have a challenge for you guys. In the comments below, I want you to tell me what the common name for this species is, and better yet, what is the exact translation of these two words or these two names. Write down in the comment section below, and during our next live stream where we'll do a little bit of a review on scientific names, I'll tell you whether or not you're right or wrong. So let's say we know the genus of a particular organism, but we don't know the species, whether or not it's already documented and we just need more information on its characteristics, or it's a brand new species, we just don't know. So in that case, what a lot of scientists will do is they will give it the scientific name of its genus, and then for the species, it'll just say species, or to shorten it, SP dot. And that basically indicates that we don't know what the species is, but we at least know what the genus is. Now, in certain cases, especially let's say in the plant world, as for our aquarium plants, for example, you'll come across a lot of plants that'll have, or a few plants that will have the genus, it'll say species, and then in parentheses, it'll have a name that basically could be a variety. So it will be the genus, species, and the variety would be this, and that kind of gives us a little bit of a characteristic or a differentiation from other organisms from that same genus. So for example, I have here Echinodurus species renai. So that is, common name is the renai sword, or renai Amazon sword. Now we know the genus to be Echinodurus. We don't know what the species is in particular, but we know it's the renai variety. So that's how it would usually be named if you come across that species in literature. Now, one thing I do want to mention is, not all the time, but for most cases, especially in research literature, whenever a scientific name is being written, it would always be italicized. That's just how it has been. And if you've ever seen me write scientific names, I would always type it or write it in basically italicized to differentiate that this is the scientific name of said organism. Now let's look at the process of how you would come about figuring out the scientific name. So to understand that, we need to understand what I like to call the taxonomical tree. This is also called other things as well. I've just referred to as a taxonomical tree. This was also, from my understanding, introduced by Carlos Linnaeus. But basically, if you've ever been in elementary school biology or high school biology, you've come across this tree, starting from the largest group of animals or organisms, which would be kingdom, going all the way down to the specific species. So you have kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, subfamily, genus, and species. Now, one thing that you do want to keep in mind is for some of these categories, there's also subcategory. So, for example, we have phylum. There could also be a subphylum. To a particular group. So that's something to keep in mind of, and it can get pretty confusing as well. But this is basically what we utilize. And if you look at that chart right next to that image that I have, that's basically the taxonomical tree of the Ocellaris clownfish. So we go all the way to the largest kingdom, Animalia, fish are animals obviously, phylum, Chordata, basically referencing a spinal cord. Class would be Actinopterygiae. Order would be Piriformes. Excuse me if the pronunciation is a little iffy. The family would be Pomecentiridae. Subphylum would be Amphipyrinae. Genus would be Amphiprion, and then the species is Ocellaris. So the scientific name would be Amphiprion ocellaris, and that is your Ocellaris clownfish. By the way, as you can tell, my pronunciation, my Latin or Greek is not that good, so do excuse me. Even us scientists have trouble with scientific names, but the more you say the name, if you've learned it, the more you say it, the more you'll be better at it. That's what I've come to understand. So do excuse me, but basically that gives you an example of the process of where the scientific name comes from. And that's pretty much it. That's a basic introduction to scientific names. I could go more in depth into this if I wanted to, but I don't want to really make it too complicated. And there's a lot of other videos on YouTube and everywhere else that will kind of go a little more in depth into the world of scientific nomenclature. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them down in the comment section below. And like I mentioned in the next live stream that we'll do kind of like a little review and go over these questions on that stream if you would like. So make sure you drop those questions down in the comment section below. And with that being said, my fellow aquarium scientists, thank you very much for stopping by. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, so you don't miss any future videos. As well as, let me know what I got right, what I got wrong in the comments section below. And with that being said, thank you very much. Enjoy your aquariums, and I'll see you next time. Take care.